we spoke about the Black Liberation Army within the Empire of the United States with activist, historian and national spokesperson for the August 3rd collective, Haki Shakur. The BLA's first public declaration was in 1971. Similar groups were being formed around the world at that time. The FARC in Colombia formed in 1964. The PFLP formed in Palestine in 1967. The Provisional IRA formed in Ireland in 1969. So who were the BLA?
The Black Liberation Army. The season of struggle is our season. 1970 to 1981. The Black Liberation Army, or BLA, was a political, military clandestine formation and organization that formed in the underground of the hills of North America for the liberation of new Africans, African black people, in the Empire of the United States of America. But in order to understand BLA, you have to understand the history and the struggle of new African people in the United States of America. Some say the Black Liberation Army formed on the plantations of the South. Some say Nat Turner had the first Black Liberation Army in 1831. Some say Gabriel Prosser was forming a Black Liberation Army on the plantation fields of Henrico, Virginia. Some said Denmark Vesey had a Black Liberation Army organized on the plantations of South Carolina. Some said the Black Liberation Army was Charles Dessalines and the 400 to 500 new Africans and African enslaved ancestors who uprose on the plantations in the parishes of Louisiana. But one thing we do know for sure, the Black Liberation Army became fully active and gained its name in 1971.
What struggles did the BLA emerge from?
In order to understand the material struggle and material conditions from in which BLA emerged from, you have to understand the historical context of the self-defense history of new African people inside the United States of America. You have to understand the state repression, the white racist violence and terrorism that Africans and new Africans endured, which they combated with self-defense in this country's history period in time, which in fact was an above ground, clandestine political military movements of the late 1950s to the early 1960s that arose above ground in order to move on into the more recent histories of why the underground BLA emerged. One specific organization, which is the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, the Black Panther Party, came under a brutal state attack repressions from this country's law enforcement and FBI organization, which in fact J. Edgar Hoover brought into existence, called the Counterintelligence Program, which caused internal conflict within the ranks of the leadership of the now defunct Black Panther Party. So in order to survive that brutal repression from the FBI and police, many of these members decided to go underground and reorganize and reform and remerge in which what you know today as the Black Liberation Army to survive the season of struggle.
What kind of actions did the BLA engage in, and what years and places were they active?
In order to protect those who are active in the Black Liberation Army, BLA, and those who are no longer active in the Black Liberation Army, let me just go on the record to protect them and say alleged actions that took place by BLA. Some of these actions that took place in the years of the 1970s and 1980s all across the major cities of the United States empire, I would say some of those actions were bank appropriations, sabotage, ambush, and assault missions on local law enforcement agencies, and any known threat to the above political apparatus. BLA took on what we know today as the strategy of the best defense is to go on offense, military actions on reactionary law enforcement agencies and police terrorists across the United States of America.
How did the US state work to crush the BLA?
How did the state work to crush the Black Liberation Army? You will have to study the historical context of the Black Liberation's military campaigns in the three epochs, which was from 1970 to 1972, from 1972 to 1979, and last but not least, which was considered the last stance of the Black Liberation Army or operations of the Black Liberation Army, which was the Brinks robbery in 1981. You have to understand through that period of time, the Black Liberation was engaging in military campaigns and actions on law enforcement departments across the United States of America in major cities. So a lot of BLA members were either assassinated, murdered in what we call slain in combat, or a lot of Black Liberation Army members were captured in that period of time. So the state brutal repression intensified by the COINTEL program orchestrated by J. Edgar Hoover during that period of time of the 1970s, which was the most extensive activity of the Black Liberation Army.
What happened to the BLA veterans?
The status and what happened to many Black Liberation Army vets. We understand that many Black Liberation Army combatants and soldiers were slain in combat. You had individuals like Haki Shakur, Twamin Myers, Matari, Shabaka Sundiata, who all died or were assassinated in combat. You have many individuals who were captured, who did their time and were released. Many of those individuals who are still incarcerated today is Jalil Muta King, Kamal Siddiqui, Fred Burton, Joseph Boeing. Many of these individuals have did over 40 to 50 years as prisoners of war of the new African Black nation in duty and service of the Black Liberation Army. Many of those individuals died in prison, like Kwesi Balagoon. Many of them died upon release after prison. Sophia Bukhari, Owusu Yaki Yakubu, names of individuals we should all remember and honor and commemorate to this day, who gave the ultimate sacrifice for the independence of new African people inside the United States of America's empire.
What lessons should young revolutionaries take from the experiences of the BLA?
What many of our youth across the world who are in extensive study of revolutionary history, politics, and science should learn and take away from the active years of the Black Liberation Army, BLA. First, I would say they should learn from the mistakes of the Black Liberation Army, and to learn from the mistakes and to correct them, and to never, ever repeat those mistakes in this time and place we are living in this material world. We should also let the youth understand that the revolution is in their hand, and it's their duty to form a movement of resistance, whether it's armed or unarmed, But specifically in this case, you should always be trying to form some kind of clandestine underground military faction and formation to defend oppressed people. And you also have to understand the objectives of political military organizations like the Black Liberation Army, that these organizations had an objective, and that objective was complete independence for new African people and oppressed peoples, to take up arms and to fight and sacrifice for what we know as true liberation, true freedom for oppressed people across this planet. And you have to understand the ideology of the Black Liberation Army that many people tend to leave out, which is that they were anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-sexist. One of the most important principles that the youth should take from, to incorporate women into your military ranks, and to also always understand what the BLA believed. They believed that the character of reformism was based on an unprincipled class collaboration with our enemy. And to understand that the BLA stated that we must strive for the abolishment of these systems and institutions of socialistic relations in which Black people have total and absolute control over our destiny as a people. You must learn that. The youth should also understand the third and final principle of BLA, that in order to abolish our systems of oppression, we must utilize the science of class struggle. Develop this science as it relates to our unique national condition. Free the land by any means necessary. Long live BLA. Long live the Black Liberation Army. As Assata Shakur stated, who's in exile, one of our main symbols of the Black Liberation Army. As long as Black people, new African people in the Empire of the United States of America, or know where African people be, there will always be a Black Liberation Army. All power.
Capitalists take away what's right.